Okay, thank you, everyone. I want to welcome everyone. A warm welcome to the audience and to our speakers. I'm Shailendra Singh from the University of the South Pacific in Suva, Fiji, where we are enjoying really pleasant weather at the moment. And it is my great pleasure, first of all, to introduce our speakers for session one. Session one covers quite a broad range, including legal, business, environment, politics, economics, health, migration, new indenture, and Pacific, and the newly introduced Pacific Labor Scheme. And we have an impressive lineup of speakers, starting with Professor of Economics at the University of Fiji, Sunil Kumar and Rina Kumar. Then we have Dr. Farzana Gounder. She's from IPU, New Zealand Treasury Institute. Then we have Nileshni Devi, Sheenal Shivanjani Prasad, and Sweta Swastika Devi. They are the next in line, followed by Sweeta Shivanjani Kumar, and finally Shelly Salokshana and Ravina Maharaj, all from the University of Fiji. Just a quick reminder to our speakers, each topic in this session is allocated 15 minutes, and I've been told that we must keep to the time. I will alert the speakers with 2 minutes remaining, and then I'll have to call an end to the session once the time is up. We are having discussions afterwards, and I'm looking forward to that as well. Just a reminder to our participants, please keep your mics muted at all times. Okay, and you can send questions through the chat box, or you can ask questions directly by raising the virtual hand. And just a reminder, another important reminder, as a matter of ethics, people should not record or put materials online without the consent of the presenters. Okay, so that's all from me for now, and we will have the first speaker, Professor Sunil Kumar and Rina Kumar.
Yeah, okay, Shailen, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, we don't have to share the screen, right?
I think you can share the screen.
Okay, yeah.
But all others need to switch off their video and mic.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm sharing the screen now. I'm just worried about this, my system, it blacks out when some of these things is done, you know. So, okay, let's see. Participants can see, yes. Can you see my screen now? I will go on presentation.
Yeah, Sunil, we can see your screen. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay. Keep pressing this, right? Push one. We just have 15 minutes. You can go up. Take you to the front, right? Okay. Start.
Thank you very much. We are privileged to be presenting in this international conference. The important topic is population politics and economic well-being and Indo-Fijian perspective. I'm Rina Kumar from School of Communications, Language and Literature, FNU. And the other presenter is Professor Sunil Kumar from Uni-Fiji. Now, we'll be presenting I will be doing the introduction, bit of history and data, while the other presenter will be doing the rest. Well, 37 years had been there for Indians, and a total of 60,965 indentured laborers came and worked on the Fijian land from 1879 till 1916. And it was initiated, as we all know, it was initiated by Sir Arthur Gordon, the first substantive governor of the British Fiji Islands in that 1875 to 1880. This was basically done to meet the labor needs of the colony. And more so, it was a desperate need for the indigent laborers on this land because the Fijians or the natives were prohibited from getting employment or doing any commercial or taking over any commercial employment, and which increased the uncertainty and cost of the importing Polynesian labor. Quite a few of the immigrants kept up ties with India, with their families, but only 40% returned, and many of them suffered great hardship. That is according to the historian Gillian and the others. Well, there was a policy that was placed that after 5 years of agreement, they were free to return to India at their own expense. But whether the question is whether they had the money to return or not at their own expense. The colonial government was compelled to give them free passage at the end of the 10 years of agreement. And that also wasn't too clear, the procedures of getting this free passage possible for these agreementers at the end of 10 years. How many did get the free passage? We have no idea. It is argued that they were prevented from returning to India by the colonial government of Fiji and the colonial sugar refinery company, the CSR of Australia. So administrative blinds were basically used to confuse the potential applicants and minimize their exit from Fiji back to India. The administrative procedures were not documented properly. The people at the end of 10 years, or rather, yes, the dignitaries were given leased land and then were basically offered as the CSR profits at that time were too lucrative, and then the CSR couldn't afford to lose the dignitaries, and therefore they were basically lured with this leased land. Despite all this, 40% returned. Only 40% returned. And you can see some history with data, which I'm going to quickly go through. You can see that that's a period, a decade, a 10-year period gap. And you can see that the Indian population is quite significantly rising, and it has gone up till 1966 with 50.5% compared to the natives. When it was showing, during this period, it was showing that it was falling due to some sickness that must have come up into the country, and they were not immunized. Well, looking at the Indians, they were suddenly, you'll see that in 1976, the population had started to fall due to some political reasons. The British were basically giving negative narratives or narrations to the natives about the increase, the sudden increase, not suddenly, really, the significant increase in the population of the Indians, and as a threat, basically creating fear to the natives that we might take over the government, right? And then, so Sunil, the other presenter, is going to continue from here with his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was a quick one. I will go over the graphical representation of this population distribution. You can see this this chart over here. You can see the red line. The red line very clearly shows the period in which the Indo-Fijian or the Indian population actually exceeded that of the native Fijians. This was the fundamental reason that created the fear amongst the native Fijian leaders And fortunately or unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, the British, the colonial government personalities, I would assume, were trying to churn out, negativities, and it was being propagated that Indians were going to take over the government. So that was a huge fear that was being created at the time of the colonial government, and soon after the Gilmit was over. So there are some negativities that I would want to point out. For instance, how those negativities, those conflict situations were created. For number one, soon after the Gilmit, and particularly so in the 1940s, when the Indo-Fijians or Indians were actually settling down a little bit, lands were being allocated and so on, Indians started accumulate wealth, places, houses, income, and so on. So that was another element of that conflict scenario that was being created. Indian culture was seen as a threat to the Christian way of life. That was also propagated. You would probably be able to figure out in the narratives that were being generated in the 70s, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. A lot of these negativities were also generated because the Indo-Fijian population of people were quickly acquiring lots of professional skills and entering into civil service, and that you would have observed pre-1987. And that is when the coup happened. You would probably realize that soon after the coup, 1985, 86, 87, that is when post 87 you see the downward trend of the Indo-Fijian population. So 1987 was the height of all the conflicts that was happening between two major ethnic groups. 1993 to 1998, there was a constitutional resolution that was happening. So that was also an interesting period when a lot of discussions were happening and talks and issues were coming out. Of course, after the resolution of the constitution, the election came, and 2000 coup happened. That was again at the height of this conflict situation. Violence happened, and all these things started. Land lease withdrawal started, and thousands of Indo-Fijian farmers had to leave their farms, and they preferred to settle in the urban and suburban areas. And this is how you see greater, Suva would have, or greater Lautoka or other cities, you would find Indo-Fijian populations into, kind of cluttered places. Of course, then came the 2006 coup, which changed many things, changed perceptions and changed the idea of military, changed the idea of, Fijian aristocracy, and many things changed, right? Political rights of ethnic the agenda of the political rights came onto the discussions. Indians continued to dominate. Now today, Indians continue to dominate after so many years, 10, 15, 20 years after 2000 coup and 2006 coup. That continues. But one interesting thing is that the native Fijians are gaining, economically in terms of professional workplaces where they are joining, and they are being seen very significantly as contributing towards the economy. So even while businesses are dominated, native Fijians are joining professionally, and they are well placed in the society. So that gives a positive angle to this particular perspective. The two dominant ethnic groups are much more at ease now. So that is something I think is a positive point of whatever conflicts have happened so far. And we would see more cross-party, cross-ethnic, political collaboration taking place, which is an excellent thing for a multiracial society. But on the negative side, a recent finding in a published, poverty report, we find that 75% of poor people in Fiji come from the native Fijians. And this is absolutely worrying. Worrying because it could become part of the political narrative.
Hey, Professor Kumar, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. So, a lot of things, even then, it is very least likely that ethnic narrative will dominate anything. It would be there, but it will not dominate all the other narratives. So, this victim thing, all these things will be there. But we have seen things happening like in South Africa recently. We have seen things happening in Guyana recently. These are some worrying signs. Could Fiji actually slip into that direction again? That is something that worries us. But so on the whole, what is the solution to this? And one huge solution is that we must have a better economy. Better economy means that the conflicts that are there can actually be resolved. And we have fundamental problems that can be solved. One of them is skills gap, but fortunately, we have an excellent, educational infrastructure which could help the whole country into moving towards, training our people and improving our economy. How it will happen, it depends upon the government policies, and that is fundamental reason why we would need a very good, government in place that has the capacity to put in place good policies. I'm putting some data here to show that our sectors have not done well, right? Sugar sector has declined. This data is showing it, which means that the mainstream, what used to be mainstream economic sector is actually declining. So not a good sign, huh? So this is how I will end. But if there are any questions, I would be most willing to answer. Internalization of the economy post-COVID is the way to go, and I think that is happening. I'm not too sure what is the internal thinking of the current government, but that would be one of the ways in which we can solve our problems, including induction of new technologies. So, so this is it. Huh? So this would be my last bit. That Indo-Fijians have a good future, provided we can build up good economy in the country through good policies. Thank you, Vinaka and Danbad.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent presentation to set the context for the rest of the speakers, going back into history and then looking into what it might hold, what lessons it might hold for us in the future. Our next speaker, Dr. Farzana Gounder.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be sharing my screen. So Sunil, if we can turn off your screen sharing.
I'm trying to turn off.
Okay. Okay, yeah, excellent. Thank you so much.
My goodness, how can I turn it off? Ranjit is there? Oh boy.
No, you've turned it off.
Okay.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes. Fantastic. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me just open up what I have to do on my computer as well. Seem to be living in a computer world right now. Okay, so Vinaka Vakalevu, Sunil, and Dhanbad. So this presentation that I am doing is on behalf of Moritz Hassan Khan and myself, because we both came up with this framework in consultation with other researchers in the field of indenture studies, and I will acknowledge them towards the end of my presentation. So the video, of course, is available on that YouTube channel, so you can watch it. What I'd like to show you is the framework itself. It's available on my website at the moment, but it will also be available through the Indentured Labor Route Project website, which is under development. So if you do go to my website, and the link is up here, and I'll also put it in the chat box for you. What you can see is that all these segments, you can roll your cursor over them and see what each of those segments are about. The other thing you can do is expand each of the segments. So if you double click on, say, institutional policies and practices, contracts, maternal and child welfare, it all expands out. And you can also expand using those pink arrows on the side. And once you've decided, okay, this is what I'd like the framework to look like, you can then download it and print it off as well if you wish to. So this is freely available. Okay, so just a little bit about the framework then. The framework arose in response to Vijaya Tilak's keynote address at the 2018 Indenture Conference, or Indenture and Slavery Conference, that Moritz organized in Suriname. And Tilak noted a significant gap in indenture studies in her keynote address, which is a significant lack of comparative studies across the indentured diasporas. And so through the framework that you can see here, Moritz and I provide a platform for the systematic and comparative analysis of cause, effect, and response to acts of inequality from the perspective of the plantation-based individuals. And by that we mean the men, the women, and the children who lived on the plantations, the Girmet plantations. And what our study actually demonstrates, and the study will be available through the first volume of indenture papers, which will be launched at the end of this conference. The study demonstrates how the juxtaposition of institutional practices with complex and interrelated social, structural, and individualized factors created pathways of cause, effect, and response to inequitable social and material structures within which these individuals lived and worked on a daily basis for at least 5 years, most 10 years. And through the consolidation of these factors, which you can see up here, the study proposes a multi-level theoretical framework. And this allows us to analyze across the indentured colonies causal factors and pathways for discrimination in the allocation of resources, the resultant health outcomes for adults as well as children, and the strategies that the plantation-based individuals utilized in response to perceived and actual acts of inequalities. So I'm not going to go on and on today because you can always watch the video itself. You can also read it in the forthcoming journal article. But what I can say is that we're really looking forward to working with you and coming up with new ways of talking about indenture, which allows us to compare indentured outcomes across the colonies. So examples of things that we could be looking at could be laborers' response to perceived acts of inequality, such as resistance acts amongst laborers in different colonies towards the same causal factors, such as the loss of wages or low wages. We can also look at resistance acts amongst female laborers as women, and also as mothers in different colonies. And the analysis of response using the framework will allow us to provide a clearer picture of the types and expressions of response, the contexts within which these responses were located, and the types and expressions of causal factors that the laborers could and did react against. So this approach will help us to look at the complexity of indenture rather than making it into a simple construct. And two much needed areas of study is the life course approach. How did indenture affect an individual from the minute that they entered the plantation environment? So as we know, some people were born onto these plantations. Some arrived as very young children, some arrived as adults. So how did indenture affect them differently? Another thing we could look at is the intergenerational impact of resource inaccess. And we could look at, how this goes on over time. How does this affect generations? And also an important area of analysis is to look at the comparison between indenture and post-indenture health outcomes to determine what factors were limited to the plantation and what factors moved from the plantation environment to post-indenture populations. And I know a number of us are interested in looking at the health of the Indian populations across the diasporas. We're interested in looking at the high rates of suicide across our diasporas. Is this something that we could do through the use of this framework? So just to end, we would like to thank the following reviewers in alphabetical order for their feedback on the draft version of the framework. We had S.Kumar, Brijla, Radhika Mahase, Satendra Pirtham, Loma Shrup Narayan, Brinsley Samaru, Vijay Tilak, Gulam Vahid, and there must be so many others that I've left out, and I'm sorry if I did. So thank you very much and look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you. That was another excellent presentation. And it highlighted how there are still so many unanswered questions about how indenture affected not just the laborers, but also their descendants. For example, is there a link between the high suicide rate? Okay, now I call on the next speaker, the third speaker, to come to start her presentation. We have Nileshni Devi from the University of Fiji.
I don't think she's online, Shailen.
Okay, so if Nileshni is not available for now, we might bring her in later on. Let's ask Sheenal Shivanjani Prasad and Sweta Swastika Devi, University of Fiji speakers.
Good morning to you all. Are you able to hear me, sir?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Today, I will be just providing a summary of our presentation, which is available on YouTube. It is based on the theme Health, Migration, and Labor Exploitation. Firstly, in our paper, we are discussing about how migration has affected the mental well-being of the diasporas. Firstly, the separation of the migrants from their homeland was the first thing that had affected their mental well-being. And secondly, it was when they reached to the depot, they had encountered Europeans for the first time. They had seen their face. There were difference amongst the Indians and the Europeans, and their language were different as well. And when they reached the depot, they were told to put a thumbprint on their on an agreement. That agreement was written in language which was foreign to them. And secondly, it was when it had affected their well-being when they were told to forget their caste system and their religion was not taken priority of. They had to let go of their caste system. It is being shown through Pancham. He was one of the Girmitiya. He wanted to follow his caste system, but he wasn't allowed to. If he had to eat, if he had to survive, he had to eat amongst people with different caste and people with different religions, because the Europeans, when they signed the agreement, it was like that they had to be the laborers, they had to be the slaves, and not they were not regarded as different religion and different caste, but they were only regarded as slaves. And later on, when they arrived to Fiji, they had interacted with people of different religion, for example, Itoki Fijians, when they first saw them, they were afraid because of how they looked. And one of the Girmites, when they saw the Fijian, they called them junglies. And they used to walk in 7 or 8, in groups of 7 or 8 with sticks because they were frightened of them. And vice versa, the Fijians' reaction to attitude towards the Indians were hostile as well. And Lutheran, on the other hand, as I have said, Lutheran with his groups, they had walked in groups because they were afraid. And when they saw their hair, it was different for them. It was different from them. And they were like, they were afraid. What if they might become like them, staying with them, they might change their behavior. Thank you. Now I will tell my partner Sweta to take over from here.
Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Sweta, but we can't see you.
There's something wrong with my camera, actually. I'm trying to start the video, but it doesn't allow me to. Is it okay if I continue without my video?
Yeah, that's fine, I'm sure.
Okay, to briefly summarize our presentation. Okay, firstly, I would like to thank you all for giving us an opportunity to present in such an important conference. So to briefly summarize our presentation, I would discuss some of the things that I have talked about in our presentation, which is available on YouTube. So firstly, I have talked about how labor exploitation and migration affects the maternal health. So labor exploitation is an act where the employers take unfair advantage from the employees. Women during indentured systems suffered a lot in terms of exploitation, as they were not only physically exploited, but were sexually exploited as well. It included beating them when they were unable to walk and also sexually harassing them. During the indentured system, the pregnant women were provided with rations to survive, which helped the women to live without facing harsh punishments from the overseers and sardars. The painful fact after pregnancy was that they had to carry out difficult tasks, even though they were not prepared physically to carry out such tasks. For example, there was one of the Girmitian Naraini who has shared her story, and she tells that she was told to break stones just after giving birth. Just after 6 days of giving birth. She was neither mentally prepared nor physically prepared. And because she just lost the baby and she gave birth to a still baby. Being unable to complete the task that Naraini was given, she was beaten by the overseer, which led to unconsciousness and was taken to the hospital for medical care. But sadly, at that time, there was no proper medical care given. It can be said that it has been a painful journey for the indentured women. And secondly, how did the knowledge of herbs and spices transported through slavery and indenture changed the culinary and medicinal landscape of homeland? We all enjoy the Indian food, which has a lot of spices in it. And talking about spices, we know that when the Indians were brought from India, then only these spices were brought with them, because before that, Fiji only had the Itoke birds. There are some of the herbs that too we use today to treat certain sicknesses, and that too we can say was brought along with the indentured laborers. And the herbs and spices brought were used for cooking and medicinal purpose, and then when they came to Fiji, they used the spices in the food that they cooked. In this way, the herbs and spices that they used were introduced in Fiji. These spices added new taste to the people during the indenture. There were some herbs too, which were brought. For example, one of it is the tulsi plant that we have almost at every Indian place. Tulsi plant, it was mostly brought for the purpose of praying, but it was also used as herbs to cure certain diseases. We use it even today. The other thing is the turmeric. It is proven that turmeric helps in treatment of certain diseases. Some people even drink it with the milk, which helps heal faster. Turmeric is also used as a spice, which adds color and taste to the Indian food. And almost all Indians, even pigeons now, use turmeric now in their cooking. So basically, this has brought in the new buds in PG, which people enjoy till date, and I'm sure will continue to in the future. And to give a comparative analysis of health in the diasporas, it can be said that it was possible for Indians in the barracks to become infected with parasite in a number of ways. In such an environment, hookworms could be passed on by way of contaminated food, in particular, imperfectly cooked meat. Endangered Indians living in overcrowded and insanitary conditions and often malnourished were ever vulnerable to infections, especially if those carrying the disease were permitted to handle food. Improperly cooked food, especially vegetables, would also have been a potent source of infection. The vast majority of those whose deaths were attributed were due to anemia. Within their term of endanger, though relatively few died within the first 6 months of their stay in Fiji. The fact that so many deaths were attributed to anemia alone is an indication of how primitive medical knowledge was at the time. Indians, it seems, were fairly well served in terms of the number of hospitals available to them, unless they were on an isolated plantation. And to conclude, indentureship was a very tough time for the Gurmitias. If it was not for them, we would not be having such facilities today. For example, roads, schools, hospitals, and many other factors. Even today, it brings out tears in our eyes by thinking about the hardships that the laborers went through to give all of us a better future. Indentureship was and still is a painful memory for all of us. Thank you, Dhanyavad Vinakavakalevu.
Okay, thank you, Sheenal and Sweta. Really interesting presentation. And it's very encouraging to see our younger generation taking such an interest in our past and in our history. Our next speaker is Sweeta Shivanjani Kumar from the University of Fiji.
Bula, everyone. Let me just share my screen. So are you able to see my screen?
No, not me. Yeah. It's starting to appear. But hang on. Yes, we can. I can see it at least.
Okay. So welcome, everyone. Bula, my name is Sweta Kumar, and I'm from the University of Fiji. And today I will be delivering my summary on the presentation on the theme, Health, Migration, and Labor Exploitation. Labor exploitation in the modern day is a reality. Though it is often seen as a thing of the past due to the rising of various human rights movements and a number of highly active NGOs who act as the mouthpiece of the vulnerable, this perception is many times challenged by the facts and statistics at hand, statistics that expose the rotten core of humanity. Just to give you an overview of the intensity of the situation, here are some of the statistics to back up our argument. According to the International Labour Organization, at any given time in 2016, an estimated 40.3 million people are in modern slavery, including 24.9 million in forced labor and 15.4 million in forced marriage. It means there are 5.4 victims of modern slavery for every 1,000 people trapped in forced labor. 16 million people are exploited in the private sector, such as domestic work, construction, and agriculture. 4.4 million persons in forced sexual exploitation, and 4 million persons in forced labor imposed by state authorities. Women and children are disproportionately affected by forced labor. accounting for 99% of victims in the commercial sex industry and 58% in other sectors. It also claims that more than 11 million people in Asia Pacific are victims of forced labor, accounting for well over half of the global estimated number of 21 million victims. Estimated the other way, at least 3 in every 1,000 people in Asia Pacific are in forced labor, trapped in jobs in which they were caused or deceived and which they cannot leave. Domestic work, construction, manufacturing, and entertainment are among the sectors where forced labor is most often found. Now, moving on to our first subtopic, which is connection between mental well-being and the displacement and relocation of people through labor migration. The effects of displacement and relocation of people on mental health may not be direct or obvious, but the deteriorating mental state of victims can no doubt be seen in the far horizon. The counterfactual of forced migration can be death, violence, perceived threats of bodily harm, psychological distress, or severe economic loss. As you can see in the concept chart that is shown on the screen, when a person is displaced or relocated for the purpose of providing labor, he or she is taken out of one environment and introduced to another. In the host environment, the labor may be subjected to a variety of unjust practices, such as discrimination, violence, and exposure to occupational hazards, which will eventually lead to a lot of stress, which is itself a mental issue. Given the potential modifiers, such as unfair distribution of income and prejudice towards age and gender, this only intensifies the deteriorating mental state of the displaced. The members of the displaced population are highly likely to develop the risk of mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and psychosis. Being deprived of the basic human rights and freedom does not only allow room for laborers to question their self-worth and integrity, they also question their sense of being. Harassment is the leading cause of stress and mental injury among the displaced population, with particular patterns and consequences for the marginalized workers. Oppression is the root cause of harassment. Marginalized workers are most affected, but all workers suffer. Poor working conditions contribute to harassment of marginalized workers, and privatization is making things worse. We need far-reaching solutions, to say the least. Oppression captures racism, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, and other socially constructed systems of power and domination. These systems are intersecting and mutually reinforcing and cannot be addressed in isolation. Now, moving on to the second subtopic, which is effects of labor exploitation and migration on maternal health. This has already been discussed in depth by my fellow presenter, Sweta. So I will not dwell a lot on it since we have time constraints, but I can add on to that, being displaced takes a great toll on maternal health and the health of the child as well. And according to a research paper written by Sheila Akbar Ali Hirani and Solina Richa, given the aforementioned key challenges of forced displacement, the ultimate outcome is a sudden rise in maternal and child mortality and morbidity, maladjustment, psychological issues, altered familial roles, displaced parenting, and vulnerability of exploitation. To put it simply, being displaced increases the chance of developing severe health issues of both the mother and the child. Now I will give the floor to my co-presenter, Deepika, to continue with the presentation.
Greetings to you all. And thank you, Sweta.
Now moving on to culinary and medicinal herbs. What are the changes of culinary and medicinal landscape? First of all, we will look at some of the examples here. For example, aloe vera. Aloe vera used on face as a moisturizer and soothes the cut when applied. Turmeric is a herb to keep bones strong and fight dementia. Marigold is a herb to address cuts, sores, and general skin care. Lemon balm helps relieve stress. Basil helps to relax mood. And rosemary herbs help to elevate muscle pain. So moving on to how did the knowledge of herbs and spices transported through slavery and indenture change the culinary and medicinal landscape of the new homeland. The evolution of slave trade in the British Empire in 1807 and of slavery itself in 1833 created a labor shortage in Fiji and among other countries. Migration and displacement of laborers did not only provide the host country with the labor force it needed, but also introduced knowledge, herbs and spices to a new land, resulting is the change in culinary and medicinal landscape of the new homeland for the better. The villages in Fiji Islands already had a long history with plant usage for medicinal purposes. Despite the usage of traditional medicines in Fiji Islands, the indigenous knowledge is not sufficiently documented. Parts of plants commonly used in traditional medicine were leaves, stems, flowers, bark, roots, and fruits. The indentured laborers who came to Fiji brought with them their own Indian cuisine, complete with traditional seasonings and ways of cooking. Most important of their spices were the curries. While the British brought curry to their English-speaking colonies, it was Indians themselves who took their eating habits to the rest of the empire. The basic ingredients of a typical Fijian spice mixture are cumin, coriander, fenugreek, and turmeric, are what would be used in a peasant household here. The substitute for coriander is a local herb called shadow beni that grows wild in drainage ditches. Curries are accompanied by chutneys and sauces, including mango kuchula, a mango and mustard oil pickle. Curries, a common main course, are usually served with rotis made from white flour and accompanied by relishes and pickle. Culinary delights, which were unknown in the modern world, and the knowledge of herbal medicine changed the course of the modern world forever. Accounting for the intensity of negative effects of displacement of laborers, the positive effects are often overshadowed. Moving on to the analysis of health in diaspora. Although we are not able to see it directly, or many times we try not to see it, most of us have suffered from mental health issues related to work. Individual factors include age, sex, hereditary factors. Lifestyle factors are economic class, cultural, linguistic barriers, and substance abuse. Working conditions, access to existence of jobs providing living wage. The social and community factors is the existence of discrimination, stigma, and social inclusion. Governance and socio-economic conditions whereby existence of legislation and policies affecting migrant health. In conclusion, despite the numerous occupations in which extreme exploitation has been found to occur, health research has been limited, with most research focused on the health of victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation. As greater attention tends to people who have been exploited in labor sectors, it is necessary to understand the range of occupational health and safety risks and hazardous working and living conditions of workers exploited in specific sectors. The key challenges during forced displacement include food insecurity, lack of shelter, unavailability of clean water and sanitation, poor infrastructure of healthcare services,
unavailability of birth attendants and healthcare professionals to manage medical emergencies, inaccessibility to educational and training facilities, and lack of cultural sensitivity of humanitarian workers. Thank you.
Thank you to our two speakers. Another impressive presentation. I think one of the strengths of session one is the young female speakers. As I was saying, it's really encouraging. They're taking such a deep interest in our past. And we have our next speaker, Sweeta Shivanjani Kumar from the University of Fiji.
So good morning. I have just presented with Deepika.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my apologies. I think our next speakers are Shailendra Salokshana and Ravina Maharaj, both from the University of Fiji. Shailendra and Ravina, are you present?
I don't think they are present.
Okay, so if they're not, what shall we do next? We just carry on, I suppose.
Yes, if they're the final presenters, we can move on to the Q&A. And Q&A, I think we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Shailendra.
Okay, yeah, yep, excellent. Yep, I have some questions here. Give me half a minute. Okay, so we'll go straight to the Q&A without any further ado. We have some questions on hand already that came into the chat room, but you can still ask questions. So, keep on sending your questions or raise your hands and we will take your question. Okay, so the first question is a really interesting question. And this is for Sunil, Sweta, or Deepika. And the question from Satya Dutt is, what has been the biggest threat facing the Grimitias? According to your presentation, what do you read into the Grimitias situation and the biggest threat facing them today in contemporary times? So I'll ask Sunil to address this question first.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me, Shailendra?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Satya, for your question. That's a very, very good question because a lot of the problems of Indo-Fijians and Grimitias around the world has been the issue. How to upkeep their economic well-being and continue to participate. The question basically, in my mind, is about how the Indo-Fijian or Grimitian society communities can thrive and continue to be part of the society. Well, the first threat I would see is the political instability. We have seen that in Fiji all the while, right from the end of the Grimit period to now. The fundamental issue has been the political issues of the Grimitians. In Fiji, we have seen violence. We have seen sporadic violence. We have seen systemic discrimination and everything. And they have been linked to, they're all linked to the political power. And I would say political stability. If political stability is there and law and order is there, then I think the lives of the Grimitians would be fine, because then problems can be solved systematically through the judicial process and all that. As soon as we get out of that ambit of political order and civility and all that, the problem would start. And I think the Grimitians remain quite vulnerable to violence. So that's the problem. And that's the reason why Grimitians all around the world should be working towards political stability. That does not mean giving up your rights, but it means working systematically towards consolidation of political stability and consolidating the political rights of everyone. So I think this would be my answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. Sweta, do you want to tackle that question based on your research and findings?
For sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dutt, for that wonderful question. Since my research was based on mental health of Girmitias, I would certainly say the biggest challenge for the Girmitias would be their mental health, for sure, because like Mr. Kumar has just mentioned, that the Girmitias were vulnerable to violence, and a great deal of it as well. And if you are introduced to a new environment and you are subjected to violence and demeaning treatment, for sure it is going to take a toll on your self-esteem, and you will inevitably question your self-worth. And like our ancestors who came from a far land, they had their own values, their own customs, and their own traditions. When they came to a new land, they were introduced to a different set of tradition and a different lifestyle. So once they are forced to give up, they were never forced, but they must have that mental burden of being present somewhere else that is not home. So once you are present in that sort of environment, they would for sure feel inferior. And so I think that the biggest challenge was an internal one, to establish their self-worth in a new homeland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sweta. And what about you, Deepika? Do you want to add to the discussion? Deepika, do you want to add to the discussion? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next question then. And the next question is, give me half a minute. Okay, the question is the balance being represented in other institutional and government areas? I think this is a question for Fiji, perhaps Professor Sunil Kumar. And the question is, what about parity in Fiji in terms of the civil service and other government institutions? Our history has shown that institutional power, that is police, army, etc., and a responsive government are crucial to the preservation of our security. So what are the realistic chances of achieving parity in these institutional power structures, you might say?
Yeah, Chair, that's a real tough question. But in Fiji, as you would know, the military is almost absolutely ethnic Fijian. There are many different ways of explaining that. It's the design of the British. It's the after the British, I think there was a concerted effort to keep the Indians out of the military, but also there has been huge reluctance on the part of the Indo-Fijians to join the military, even when there was no threat of war or anything. But Indo-Fijians deliberately kept out of the armed forces. And a similar kind of problem we see in Guyana, for instance, where even the police force is one-sided, terribly one-sided, and the violence that is being created, the judicial link that we have, for presenting cases and so on, gets totally and thoroughly diminished, which means that forever the Guyanese Indians, remain afflicted with violence and aggrieved by that particular phenomena. How that balance can be achieved in future, honestly, I don't have an answer. But political participation, political balance, attaining political power could address part of the problem. And in the civil service, where mostly it's about professional, about merit and so on, we should continue to strive for merit. And I think the rest of the things will fall in place. So I haven't read much about this, but from my own experiences, from my own experience in Fiji, I would be able to say that on the rest of the civil service, we need merit, and Indo-Fijians and Girmitians are known for hard work. So academia or academic excellence is not something far off for our achievements. So therefore, we should remain embedded in our mindset of achieving the best that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. This next question is for Dr. Gounder, Farzana Gounder. Is the Girmitia able to strike a balance between preserving their culture, language, etc., and also sort of, blending in with the host country, the host population?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And it comes down to us as individuals and as a community. There's always the choice that we make. Do we wish to maintain our language and culture, and to what extent? And how much do we wish to integrate into the host community and culture? There's always give and take. And I think in Fiji, to be honest, we've done quite well. I understand that the Ministry of Education has now put in place measures where children of Fiji Indian origin are learning Fijian, conversational Fijian, and those who are Fijian are learning Fiji Hindi. And when I came to Fiji, the last time, of course, was 2019, I was quite pleasantly surprised to hear children or teenagers speaking in both languages. And, there were Fijians speaking in Fiji Hindi to other Indians and vice versa. So that is also crucial if we wish to maintain harmony as a society, maintain political harmony as well, and to integrate better and to respect each other more. We do need to understand and to be able to use each other's languages, because then we can appreciate each other's worldviews. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next question is a related question. And again, for Professor Kumar and Dr. Gounder. This is a really interesting question. And this is an elusive question, you might say. And the question is, what would be the best recipe for peace and harmony and stability for all the diasporic communities?
Sunil, I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Well, I think Farzana would be able to answer that pretty well. I can say that in Fiji, we are doing fairly well. There's reasonable amount of peace. We haven't had, we have had some, sporadic violence, which were very hurtful to Indo-Fijians. But also, once the state machineries, the security machineries, the system is in place that espouses for, good citizenship, then I think that's where we are. And in Fiji, there's reasonable amount of, constitutional settlement. I'm not entirely happy with what we have, but I think we would be able to resolve that. Letting democracy, letting dialogue prevail, that is the way to maintain peace and harmony amongst the groups. So that would be my take on it. Thank you.
I agree, Sunil. And I think as long as there is respect, a willingness to understand that, every culture is valuable, every language is valuable, and not see ours as being greater than the other, I think we will go a long way to creating the beautiful Fiji that we all talk about and sing about in our national anthem. It's really important to embrace our differences. They shouldn't be seen as a point of weakness that needs to be removed, but rather embraced, because they all are valuable. We all bring something Indigenous knowledge is really important. Our Girmit heritage is really important. This needs to be taught to our children as well. This needs to be part of the curriculum so that we all know where we came from and who we are, and that our forefathers chose to remain in Fiji and to create Fiji with the other communities around them. This belongs to all of us.
Thank you for that, Dr. Gounder. The next question is from Pritika Narayan, and she made a comment. She said, the impact on our health and well-being of subsequent generations as a result of indenture is significantly underestimated. So that's a comment. My question is, are we really feeling those impacts to this day, both on our physical and mental health? And how so? For example, how can you link the high suicide rates today to the indenture system that happened a long time ago? And this is a question, I think, for Dr. Gounder.
Okay, so this is an area of research that a number of indentured historians are interested in. I know Lomash and Moritz, for example, have been talking about doing research in this area. It is quite sad that throughout the Girmit diasporas, suicide rates are high for us. And in fact, at the last conference that we had, Dr. Neil Sharma did an excellent presentation on this. I think more research is needed before we can actually give answers to this. This is new. We haven't really looked into this properly. So let's do something about it. So this is a gap in our knowledge that we do need to address.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one more question is, have the Girmitias sometimes developed a siege mentality? Or is it a product of their surroundings? For example, fragile peace. I think Dr. Sunil Kumar might be the person to answer this question.
Shailen, can you read that question again for me, please?
Okay, the question is, have the descendants of the Girmitias sometimes developed a siege mentality? Siege mentality, meaning they feel threatened all the time. So is this realistic, or is it imagined, or is it a state of their condition? I mean, for example, fragile peace. They are in environments of fragile peace, hence the anxiety. And this is reflected in the huge numbers in which they are migrating. Of course, one of the reasons is economic purposes, but as you mentioned in your presentation, political instability and associated fears means that perhaps, the Girmitia descendants are not entirely at peace in their minds, in their countries.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's a tough one. But Indo-Fijians migrating in their second wave towards Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, and everywhere else. It has been a conduit, just like that for Caribbean Indians, like Guyanese Indians. A huge number and percentage of them have, have moved out to, parts of US. That has eased off the conflict. But the sorry thing is that the people who remain in the country of their birth and where the conflict is located often get into more trouble. But my thinking is that cannot happen forever. I think we have to be at ease with what the situation is. If it is a political struggle, we have to put up a fight. I would not say that Indo-Fijians or Girmitias would enter into kind of conflict, but we have to resolve. I think there's enough capacity within the communities, Girmitia communities everywhere, including South Africa, to be able to enter into dialogue, create dialogue, and be able to negotiate their way out of deep conflict. Any kind of conflict, yeah, the community may be shaken. We have seen that in 1987, there was huge droves of people going out, but there were also people who were determined to stay back and put up a fight to resolve the issues politically. That has happened. So even when the proportion of people have declined, we can continue. Even in minority, we can matter in politics, and you will see in how strange ways it happens. So my view and my take would be that the Girmitias need to remain, consolidate. We have avenues through which we can empower people. I think we are living in an information age where everything that happens here, there is known world over. So, so as far as that technology is there, we remain in the civilized world. I don't think we have to fear anything. We just have to continue with the struggle, and in all fronts. We don't have to choose fronts. We have enough people to take up that challenge in multiple different fronts to be able to address the issues that are there in terms of our conflicts. I think that's all I would want to say. Thank you.
There's one more question here. What about the intriguing topic of intermarriages?
Are you asking me?
Maybe anyone. Maybe,
Maybe Farzana.
Sorry, what was there a question or a statement?
Sort of like a comment, the intriguing question of intermarriages. Can they help resolve some of the issues? And what's the trend, amongst the Girmitia descendants?
Well,
anyone can comment on this.
Yeah, it depends what you consider as a boundary. Do you consider religion as a boundary, or is it North and South Indian? What is it? So that within the Fiji Indian community are boundaries that are being crossed in some cases and in others not. And then you've got the ethnic boundaries. We've got Pacific people who are indigenous, and you've got the Fiji Indian community. There's so many boundaries. So it's a matter of negotiating within, even, for example, even within the Muslim community, you have Ahmadis and Sunnis. So those are boundaries within what others would consider to be a group of people. So every time you look at a community, there are further and further boundaries. So I don't know what the person is referring to. Do they just mean across ethnic communities? But there's always got to be dialogue. There's always got to be conversations, and there's always got to be give and take. And that's how any marriage would survive, or any relationship would survive.
I think it's across.
Yeah, maybe.
Go ahead, Sunil.
Well, inter-ethnic or inter-community marriage, I think it's a beautiful thing, we all have to accept that. Now, more and more, like in Fiji, the ethnic Fijian, ethnic Itoke, and the Indo-Fijian marriage is happening. And I see, what can be more beautiful than that? I mean, that's fantastic. So that also brings the communities together, even if it is conflict, it resolves issues at the personal level, at the family level, So I have no problems. I think we should let that happen more and more.
Okay, I will admit these are rather curly questions, but we are dealing with a rather complex issue anyway.
Yeah.
So, there's no right or wrong answer. We're just trying to address the questions that are coming through.
Well, some people might disagree with me, but I think that is the way we should go. The whole world is going that way,
But that's also making an assumption that all Indians are a homogeneous population, all Fijians are a homogeneous population. Again, I'm saying please remember that, we all have different boundaries, and there has to be a lot of dialogue. There's lots of layers. As Shailendra has said, it's a very complex issue. It's not just, Indian, Fijian. It's a whole range of things that we need to think about. But wherever I have seen people marry across what I consider boundaries, these marriages have been great, and the kids have come out great, and they seem to have a better appreciation of society and community. So again, a lot of dialogue needs to be done on this, yes.
Thank you. Interesting question. I'm not sure whether if it was covered under our topic of discussion, but never mind. Okay, there's one more question from Mr. Ram Harak. Let me read this. I'm curious about Indian representation in state institutions, army, police, ministries, etc. How are Indians represented in these institutions? I understand that the Gurmitians are entrepreneurial, but the experience of Guyana and South Africa show that economic power alone will not guarantee security and human rights protection for Indians. This question is directed at Dr. Kumar. We had a similar question before, but this is a bit more detailed.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, it's about the police, it's about the instruments of the state that could give protection to communities or vulnerable groups. And the military, I think in Fiji is out of question, but police force, I think, is fairly well represented. And if we make our forces or institutions more professional, I think there should not be any problems. Whether it be intake, whether it be promotional activities, issues, or whatever, institutions need to remain meritorious. They must remain professional, and I think it will work. Military does not have any affair in the internal issues, so I would assume if institutions remain in their place, then the issues can be resolved systematically. Farzana, you might want to answer this.
Thanks. Well, as an example, our keynote speaker, Sir Anand Satyanand, he is in New Zealand. This is a country, where Fiji Indians are in the minority, and yet he was the Governor General, and he's extremely well respected. He's now the Chancellor of a major university in New Zealand. And I can name a few other people as well, but I'm naming him because, you've seen him. I think, yes, there is the question of representation, but at the end of the day, we also should think who is the right person for the job as well. Indians are doing, I think, quite well in Fiji, frankly. When you look at political representation, business representation, they're doing extremely well. And I think Sunil did point out that the latest report, the economic report, did identify Fijians, unfortunately, as being the major group that's in poverty. So in the case of Fiji, the Indian community is doing well. I think the question we should be asking, therefore, is not how well are we represented, but how well are we representing the entirety of Fiji in the work that we do? How can we benefit everyone in Fiji? Since we ourselves are doing well, how can we help those who are not, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religion and gender?
That's an excellent point, Dr. Gounder. Thank you for that. Okay, Satya Dutt has his hand up. He wants to ask a question. So we'll allow Satya Dutt to ask his question. Go ahead, Satya.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, probably I'll go back now looking at Farzana has really explained very well about the boundaries, cultural boundaries. But, I just want to let the youngsters, boys know that, they are more beautiful Fijian girls. When I went to Fiji, I see them very well dressed and very beautiful. So this is something, a point to consider.
Thanks, Satya. Thanks. Excellent observation.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have exhausted all the questions, and we even addressed some questions that were not covered under the topic in session 1. But that's excellent. That's good. So I'm going to now call an end to this session. This session is now over. I want to thank the speakers and also our participants, and I would like to invite them to participate in session 2, which will be chaired by Professor Kumar. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting.
We'll begin at 12:30 PG time, huh?
PG time, okay.
Yes. Okay.
So we'll take a break, come back at 12:30.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Vinaka.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
See you again.